Sio Dagwa Doa Hia Farina King, Yat E Farina King Yinishye. My name is Farina King, and I'm an assistant professor at Northeastern State University in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, where we find ourselves now, and I'm with a very special and honorable guest, Gail Ross, and we are having a conversation today, which is thanks to the Museum of Native American History in Bentonville, Arkansas, and of course Northeastern State University in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. We also acknowledge the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and recognize this is the headquarters of both Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and the United Kituwa Band of Cherokee Indians. We are in the home region of our featured woman trailblazer, first Native American female engineer, Mary Golda Ross, Gold, as she was known by her family and community. And Gail is a direct relative of Gold. And Gail, please introduce yourself as well.
Gold is my dad's first cousin. Chief Ross's grandson, Robert Bruce Ross. At the close of the Civil War, in which he fought for the Union in 3rd Indian Home Guard, he married a Cherokee woman named Fanny Daniels Thornton. And they had many children, and the youngest of them was my grandmother. And her older brother, William Wallace Ross, was Gold's father. So Gold and my dad are first cousins.
Amazing. So we're so glad to be here today and have this opportunity to talk with Gail directly and be in the NSU archives and special collections, where we have the set of collections featuring Mary Golda Ross, highlights of her accomplishments and life. And that's what we're going to be walking through today. As a historian and someone who has worked closely with NSU archives and special collections, it's such an honor and privilege to be able to explore and learn more from these collections of this incredible figure. We call her a trailblazer because she paved a way for women and Native Americans and all kinds of people from different backgrounds by pushing boundaries and setting an example, as the Cherokee Nation said themselves in 2008 when she passed away, an example of great intelligence and perseverance. So this is going to be more of a casual conversation. In the future, I will be having more of the series featuring different women, especially those with connections to this part of northeastern Oklahoma. I'm a guest on in Cherokee country, Jalagi country, as a Navajo Nation citizen, but as a Native American woman and scholar, being able to learn more about these incredible women and meet with individuals like storyteller Gail Ross, who's one of the best storytellers I've ever met. It's such a privilege and honor. I can't overemphasize that. And so I'll be walking through some of the items that are some are exclusive to the archives and collections here, where Mary Golda Ross was alumna of this institution, its predecessors, which we'll talk about. And then I'll be interweaving some questions for Gail to address directly. So let's get started. I'll bring out some of these archival materials and pose some questions, have this special conversation today with Gail with us. And we're so glad to you all as well for joining us and for all the support everyone's given. So to begin with, we do know that Mary Golda Ross is from Park Hill, Oklahoma, which is a part of this region in the area of Tahlequah. And these items here represent aspects of her early education in the area. This is a diploma from her high school graduation from Tahlequah High School in, it says 1925. And Gail, can you tell us a little bit about a little bit more about Mary Golda Ross' family,
Sure.
how it could have been like for her growing up. She was born in Park Hill in 1908, but she came over to Tahlequah, and why that is.
Well,
some
Park
insight to
Hill
that.
and Tahlequah are hardly separable today. But at the time, it was a 5-mile ride, you know, from Park Hill into Tahlequah. And Gold grew up the daughter of William Wallace Ross, and the son of Robert Bruce. And Robert Bruce and his wife Fanny lived in what is now called the Merle home. The founder of the Merle home, the builder of the Merle home, was a white man, a Colonel Merle, but he was married to one of Chief Ross's nieces. And after removal, many of the more wealthy, mixed blood, sophisticated Cherokees lived out in Park Hill. They actually called it the Athens of the Cherokee Nation. And so that was where Gold would have been born and spent the early years of her life. She went to a little school called Owen School. It's a little 3-room schoolhouse, and it's preserved. We can take some pictures of it later if you want.
Yeah.
But that's where she went to grade school.
I had heard of Owen School, and that's incredible, because that was also
it's
a
right
school
there.
set up by Cherokees.
Right.
Correct.
Well, where our Cherokee Heritage Center was the original site of the female seminary. And to really put a perspective on Gold's love of education, you have to look at the Ross family as a whole, because she definitely felt that her love and passion for education came directly to her through the Ross family. Chief Ross was passionate about education. At the end of the Trail of Tears, of course, in 1839, when the Cherokee were forced from our homeland to this area, because of the anger and bad feeling against those Cherokees that had signed the treaty that made removal possible.
I'm Bruce Ross. I'm a great-great-grandson of Chief John Ross. My grandfather was one of his grandsons, and my father was one of his children. My grandfather had 9 children. My granddad was the 8th of 9 children. Biscuit Ross was the 2nd child of Robert Bruce Ross and his wife Fanny Holt Ross. I'm sorry, not true. Fanny Daniel Thornton Ross. I'm thinking of Alan Ross, John's brother. Biscuit was like I said, the 2nd of the 9 children, and he married a lady by the name of Henrietta Moore. And they had 5 kids, I believe it was. And Mary Gold was the last one. Mary Golda is her real name, but those of us in the family that were close to her, we never once called her Golda. It was always Gold. Mary Gold was my first cousin. She died in 2008 at the age of 99 years and 9 months. She died in the same house that she'd been living in since 1951. It's kind of interesting because she bought that house, paid cash for that house in 1951. And her sister and her husband, I can't remember his first name. His last name was Meyer. Anyway, they lived in Middletown, New York. And they'd been living in the same house since 1946. So there's a lot of stability there in our family. When we get somewhere, we try to stay. I tried to stay at the Merle home, but the state had other plans. I'm sorry, stay at the Hunter's home. They've changed the name of it. Anyway, Mary Gold she graduated from Northeastern here in 1928 with a degree in mathematics. Not a degree in education, but mathematics, because that was a teacher's college at that time. And she took a degree in math and went to work on a different reservation. I don't remember the first job she had, but I think it might have been Cherokee, North Carolina, on the Qualla boundary.
So we know that Mary Golda Ross was the great-great-granddaughter of one of the most famous and respected Native American leaders in recent history, John Ross, Chief John Ross, who fought for Cherokee sovereignty, freedoms, recognition, and of course staying and sustaining their lands, their homelands in what's now the Southeast. But he and Gail was talking about some of that history and how that's important to know and understand where Mary Golda Ross comes from, and how especially the Ross family educational legacy and how they supported education, including what I have here are these other artifacts that Mary Golda Ross became a student of the Northeastern State Teachers College, which is what was founded initially by John Ross and other Cherokee leaders after the Trail of Tears and removal to Indian Territory. And she graduated from what became, our institution now, Northeastern State University, in 1928 by the age of 20. At a young age, she was already excelling in education. She moved to live with her grandparents in Tahlequah, which became a center of education. And this is another part of that diploma here that we see of her receiving her Bachelor's of Arts with a focus in mathematics. And so it's really remarkable that she had these opportunities as a woman to pursue education and professional development. And what do you think about that and that legacy of the Cherokee Female Seminary, for
Gold
example?
said it herself, that Chief Ross's legacy of passion for education was very influential on her. As you said, at the end of the Trail of Tears, when Tahlequah was the capital of the Cherokee Nation, there were 7 years of bloody civil war following the end of the trail because of the anger and the bad feelings against that segment of the population that had signed the treaty that made the Trail of Tears possible. But as soon as peace was reestablished in 1847, Chief Ross immediately turned his focus to education. He had received an education back when he was a boy in the Cherokee homelands. His father, Daniel Ross, had tutors for his children, and then they went on to other seminary kinds of places where I can't remember the name of the one Chief Ross went to, but he developed that passion of education early in his life, and he carried throughout his life. In 1851, the male and female seminaries were opened, and they were the first institutions of higher learning west of the Mississippi. And what you see as remarkable about those two passions of his was that the female seminary was every bit as important as the male seminary. Cherokees are matriarchal. There's a long deeply rooted part of our culture that respects women. And so Gold wouldn't have thought that it was anything unusual for her to follow her own dreams about what was important to her. She said when she first came to college and they asked what she wanted to major in, she said, "What's a major?" And they said, "Well, what do you really like?" And she said, "Math." Wow. And instead of, a lot of times lately, even today, you'll have people who say, "Oh, girls don't do math." But nobody would have said that to Gold at that time. She said that from the time she was little, she thought of math as a game. And it was always puzzles. And that's where her talent lay. And it did take a while. She went through, she graduated as a teacher. She taught school. She went to Santa Fe, New Mexico to teach Pueblo and Navajo children there. And while she was there, she furthered her own education in summer classes in Colorado.
Oh, wow.
Well, anyway, she wound up down at on the Qualla boundary down in North Carolina, and later went on to go back and pick up her master's degree at Northern Colorado State University, which is in Boulder. And I didn't think that much about it, you know. I mean, I'd been hearing stories about gold all my life, but to me, she was just gold. And I found out later in life that she was just gold. I remember riding with her one day. We were on our way out to her brother's house out in Pumpkin Holler, and Charles also worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And we were riding along talking about different things. So as we were riding along, she tells me about her got her outstanding alumni at Northern Colorado University, where she got her master's degree. And I got to thinking about Northeastern. She got it where she got her master's, but not where she got her bachelor's. I said, she needs to get it here. So I turned around and nominated her a few months later, and they had 9 people that were selected as outstanding alumnus, and she won hands down. Nobody could touch her credentials anyway. It was impossible. And one of the great honors that I had was driving her in the parade, homecoming parade, and then escorting her out to center field when she received the recognition there. Immediately after that halftime ceremonies at the stadium, I took her right straight off the field, under the stadium, out into her rental car, and we went to Tulsa. And I put her on an airplane where she flew back to San Francisco and had knee surgery the next day. I mean, and this lady was up in her 80s at that time. It was 1994, so that would have been, yeah, because she was born in 08, so yeah. So anyway, there's so many things I remember about gold. One I remember especially out at her brother's house. Your father was there, Gail, and he and Mary Gold and Charles and I were sitting there, all 4 of us first cousins, and we were sitting there listening to John Ross Pyburn, Gail's dad, and she talk about the flights and the structural engineer of various aircraft. Well, you may not know this, but Gail's father is a retired professional pilot, commercial airline pilot. And he flew for Braniff for 30-some years. Anyway, what's really funny is I'm sitting there watching. I'm sitting on the floor because, well, I'm the young one in the house, naturally, and I'm sitting there watching a verbal tennis match between Mary Gold and John Ross. Picture this. Here's one talking about the structural design of a plane. Here's one talking about the actual operation of it. And I wanted to go out in the car and get my tape recorder. But you can't actually say, hold that thought, I'll be right back.
Yeah.
You can't really do that. It's just lost. But except in memory, that's right. And I remember that very well. Gail's dad and I still talk about that day. And matter of fact, he's still kicking. He's 95 now, and he's not kicking high. But he's kicking a little bit higher than I am. But yeah, when I was a kid, every year, and you might remember this too, because you hadn't thought of it in years either. Every year, she used to send us dates for Christmas. She had a date tree in her backyard, and she made her own dates, and she sent them out to the family. I used to get, I loved them. Nothing like fresh home grade, fresh California grade. What am I trying to say? But it was awesome. The dates were fantastic. she was,
You were still in Arizona when she died, right?
I came back here.
Did you? I don't.
Oh yeah, I was here.
Why don't I remember you being here?
Well, I don't remember you being a couple places too, so, but that's okay.
I drove straight from Texas.
Well, I flew in.
Little wagon.
Yeah, I lived in Arizona for 18 and a half years, and I just came back about 6 years ago. But Mary Gold was, you know, they talk about the sequoia tree, about it being a giant among trees. That's why it's named the sequoia tree. Well, Mary Gold was pretty much a giant among women too. I mean, she accomplished so much. I mean, it's hard to fathom what all she accomplished.
I have some quotes from Mary Golda Ross. She was able to be interviewed several times and recognized for various accomplishments as she advanced in her education, her training, and contributions to aerospace projects and Lockheed Corporation that she eventually worked for. But even when we rewind and go back to her roots in northeastern Oklahoma, in Cherokee country, and as a part of the Ross family in Park Hill and the Tahlequah area, is she had some quotes about what education meant to her as a young woman. She said, "My parents believed an education was necessary to make something of yourself." She also said, so from childhood, I had been encouraged to get the best education possible and make the most of my opportunities. We did not dare miss a day of school. Another quote she had is, "I was the only female in my class." So sometimes as she advanced in mathematics, science, and then eventually engineering, seeking her certification in that.
Space engineering.
Yeah, specifically in space engineering. She said, "I sat on one side of the room and the guys sat on the other side of the room. I guess they didn't want to associate with me, but I could hold my own." So it's interesting to think about those balances of she has the Cherokee matriarchal heritage and the opportunity for both girls and boys, young men and young women, at a time when many women didn't even have those opportunities. She had those to embrace. But then as what takes her beyond Oklahoma, and you started to get into that, of she became an educator and got involved with the Bureau of Indian Affairs
and
the
taught
Indian School.
Pueblo and Navajo children living in Santa Fe.
Yes.
And it was during that time that she furthered her education. She got a master's. What was it, the University of Colorado?
I think it was the Colorado State College Teachers College.
That's it. She got
in
her
Greeley.
master's, and that really opened the door for the incredible, remarkable career that she had. In 1942, she went to Southern California and went to work for Lockheed. And I'm fairly certain that it was the men all being off at war, like it
Yes.
opened the door in many places for women. And I'm fairly certain that that's how she first made it to work for Lockheed as a mathematician. But they recognized her talents, and they were more than willing to further her education. So
I have some archival materials about that, because that was such an important part of her life, where she was encouraged by family and her successes in her interests in mathematics and science. And these are some of her work that she did at Lockheed, that they provided her training at UCLA in Southern California to refine her expertise and her abilities in engineering specifically. So these are some images of, qualifying tests, organization and review of analytic geometry, and you can see Mary Golda Ross, her name here, and kind of the different equations and works exercises that she had to develop. And I love how you brought that up. And they supported her development in that. So here are just some of the different works that she did with Lockheed support. But again, she often was the only woman at the table or in these spaces.
Well, when the men all came back from war, by that time Lockheed knew what they had.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody coming back from the war was going to take Gold's place.
And then in the middle here, we have, once she receives that training, what kind of contributions was she able to have, in these areas of space travel, imagining, and we see here these different objects and items from her archives. And I think this stood out to me was she had several books, collection of them, Colony Earth by Richard Mooney. It shows that astronauts came and stayed, and that the Earth may have indeed been colonized by beings from another universe, or whispers from space. So she had an interest in thinking beyond the limits of what most people had on their minds.
And she was a member of a very select group of engineers that were working on the beginnings of space travel. Her trajectories were amazing. I mean, some of the first trajectories that resulted in the Mercury launches were from Gold's work.
Those are some of the things we have here, are some of her work on envisioning interplanetary travel, development on satellites. She also worked with ballistic missiles, the P-38 Lightning. So these are just, again, books of her work that are in the archive, different designs. Do you mind helping me hold that, Gail? The different kind of drawings and designs she had. And for me, it's just so remarkable that, what her sketches on the page can take people to, we see over here pictures from NASA that she kept, can take people to these planets so far away and that others
Cloudy
would think
Mars.
beyond. Yeah, beyond reach.
She was fascinated her whole life with the work that she did in aerospace engineering. She said once that what she really wanted to do was be the woman behind the first woman in space. And she did that. She did that.
Absolutely. These are some other sources, too, of a planetary flight handbook that she contributed to. Manned interplanetary mission study. So that was a part of the think tank, the skunk work, they call them skunk works, the team that Lockheed had with 40 engineers who were founders of that. She was the only woman on that team. And Gail, I remember we've had conversations about this before, so I'm going to pull from some of those.
Sure.
Yeah, and I remember you brought up how your family had talked about a lot of her work being classified, and maybe some of the thoughts you had about that, of her legacy and
actually,
that
it was something that happened at her memorial service in the Cherokee Nation Council. As she became more and more active in Native community, she was you cannot understate her passion for teaching others, to talking to other Indian kids about science, technology, engineering, and math. She was a founder of ACES, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, and she began to
That's what this one is.
interact with a lot of other Native scientists and the like. And Dr. Norbert Hill, who was a compatriot of hers and a dear friend for many years, he was a chief of the Oneida tribe at one point during their long relationship. And he spoke here in Tahlequah at her service. And he said that if so much of her work had not been classified, she would have won a Nobel Prize. That's how innovative, that's how important the work that she did was. And after she retired, she had so many awards and honors that came her way, and every time she'd go to the banquet to pick up her award, what she would talk about was inspiring others, inspiring Native kids especially. One thing that we kind of zipped right by, I don't know if he's not going to be able to see this, but
we have up close shots too.
We have a close shot of this. She was on What's My Line?
On national
the television show, yes. She was a rocket scientist. And actually the panel guessed it after 6 questions.
Oh.
But it was very exciting, you know, for Gold to be on What's My Line.
And that was in 1958 when she was on that show.
I was 7 years old.
Yeah, and still people, you know, that the joke of, oh, can a woman be a space engineer?
Right.
This, you know, aerospace
rocket
engineer.
scientist.
Yeah,
you know?
rocket scientist.
And not just any woman, a Native woman.
Yes, absolutely.
But she once said that she taught Indian kids about math, and they helped her learn about other Indians. You know, she only had her experience here in the Cherokee Nation growing up. And, you know, there were many, many different tribes and many different ways that she learned about and that was always very important to her.
Yeah. I think something that stood out to me as talking with Gail and looking through all these archival materials and trying to understand Mary Golda Ross's life and these incredible accomplishments that she had is the theme of orbits. And that's why even with the archives, we tried to think about these different milestones in her life, her early years, her education, which was made possible because of her great-great-grandfather and those Cherokee Trailblazers who persevered, survived, and not only survived but thrived, and had a renaissance and that rebirth of Cherokee while there were all
there's
these
a
efforts.
reason we call our newspaper the Phoenix.
Yeah.
Every time we burst into flames, which happens periodically, we pick ourselves up and take off again.
Yeah, so some of these key parts of coming full circle, as you were saying about Gold, you can hold that one, is she connects, you know, and reconnects and connects with Cherokees, Native American community through the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, mentoring, as Gail was talking about, and how central that was for her. But also, I love the stories that Gail shares of knowing she's your great aunt,
No, she's cousin. My dad's first cousin.
Your dad's first cousin.
Everybody called her Aunt Gold. She never married. She never had children. So all of her nieces and nephews, they're her children.
Absolutely.
And the little cousins.
Yeah. So what we have here is in 1994, she was recognized as a outstanding and distinguished alumna of Northeastern State University. So, you know, parading in this area, speaking in Cherokee country.
Oh, she loved her trip home.
Yep. And another key aspect, I think we don't have a picture of it here, but we will be sure that you can see it, is I would love to hear you talk about those cherished memories you had before I talk of this is the Council of Cherokee Nation passed a resolution honoring Mary Golda Ross right before she passed away in 2008. But before then, in 2004, 4 years before she passed away, was a very important moment of her life with the opening of the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian, and Gail was there. Can you tell us about some of your memories of Gold's contributions to that museum and what you remember?
Well, she was
of that
one of the
time?
founding members of the board. And like I said, it was 2004. She had just turned 96. It was in September. And she was, she just loved it. She was, I don't think, looking back, I mean, I can't really speak for her, but watching her that weekend, I feel sure that this was one of the highlights of her life. She had her very first Cherokee tear dress to wear, and I was down on the mall. The beginning of the opening of the museum, it began with this procession of tribes down the walk of the museums.
Mm-hmm. The mall area?
The mall, the Capitol, the new NMAI, and all the tribes from Abenaki to Zuni were walking, were in the march, the procession.
Yeah, this was the largest gathering,
Oh,
one of the largest gathering of tribal
huge.
nations in the
country. It was
country.
absolutely huge. The closer to the front of the alphabet you were, the earlier you had to be there. My alarm went off at 4:30.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I wanted to be Yupik just for a minute. But so I came down onto the mall. The sun is rising. There are native people in full regalia from all over the Americas, North America, South America, and museum employees in golf carts are herding people around, and Chief Smith and Deputy Chief Grayson were there, and they had brought our flag. And so they were standing in the space where the Cherokees gathered, just holding the flag. And you could see people, oh yeah, you know, headed that way. We had our honored tribal officials, chief, deputy chief, all the council, and we had the kids in our youth choir. The Cherokee National Youth Choir is a program that Chief Smith began, and it has grown in import. Those kids have been ambassadors for us. They sing their hearts out in Cherokee, and they were going to be performing in the festival. And then just everybody fell in behind them. And y'all might not have noticed this, maybe you've noticed this. A lot of people think they're Cherokee.
That's an inside joke between us and natives, no
Yeah,
offense.
well, they were all down on the mall that morning, and they were all charging for the flag, and many of them were like in dyed chicken feather headdresses, and
Oh, no.
you know, yeah, and they just kept running over the kids in the choir because they wanted to be up by the flag where the cameras were. And so finally, Joe, Deputy Chief Grayson, he put a rank of us, like 7, behind the kids in the choir. And as we walked, it was our job to grow or shrink, to cut off all these people that were trying to run over the kids in the choir. And at one point I looked back, and way in the very back, the sun was just shining off this cap of silver curls, and I couldn't believe it. It was gold. I dropped back, and there was a museum employee walking with her who said she made me bring her down here in a golf cart. We arranged a golf cart for her because she wanted to walk in the procession. And I said, "Gold, when did you get here? What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm walking. I've waited 15 years for this day." I am in the march with the Cherokee Nation.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, here is this woman, a Lifetime Achievement Award winner of ACES, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, a woman who was honored time and time and time again, scholarships named after her. She's not a hidden figure in Native country. She is much respected and much honored. And here she gets a museum employee to run her in a golf cart, and she falls into the very last line of Cherokees. That was her. That was her. She was always so matter of fact. She was never officious or full of herself. I mean, she was proud of many things, but her own achievements, she basically put off to, well, I was told we could do whatever we could do, and this is what I could do, so I did it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, she really was
Yeah.
such an amazing character.
Yeah. Well, I especially think about that story. It's so amazing, you know, that you have all these connections in your community, and that's to me the orbit, you know, the cycle as well, which is a part for many indigenous peoples and cultures. I know as a Diné woman that it's about cycles, and the four directions are so sacred to us, and that symbolizes the journey of life and seeking to restore balance and sustain balance in our lives. And so, you know, she began being born into a world. She was born right after Oklahoma became a state.
1 year.
And that was the push for detribalization, the push to essentially disintegrate the Cherokee Nation.
We were having, I mean, that was a very difficult time.
Yeah,
especially the Ross family, of course, had been, you know, were fairly sophisticated, you know, fairly acculturated, assimilated. But for many of the deeply traditional full-blood communities, without the government that they had always known, they had always trusted the Cherokee government. They didn't know anything about state governments or county governments, and you know, so it was a very, very difficult time. But what I wanted to show was, I don't know if you can see this or not.
Yeah, we can have it zoomed in too.
Yeah, this is Chief Smith and Deputy Chief Grayson and former Chief Wilma Mankiller with I believe this was, this was taken in September. So this would have been at the opening of the museum.
Of course,
but you can see how much respect that these tribal leaders had for this woman, especially Wilma. Wilma thought the world of Gold. I think they were sisters in spirit. They both were trailblazers in their own way, and both of them had that down to earth, you know, way about them. I used to love to come up here. Before I moved up here permanently, I would bring my kids and come up for national holidays, and it would be fun to like go see the softball games. And there's this woman, Chief Mankiller, who's been touted throughout the world for her accomplishments in Cherokee government. And she's sitting there in a t-shirt and shorts and cheering her grandkids on. She was just the most basic, kind, she had her ways, but then she needed to as a tribal leader.
Strong,
you know?
Strong woman.
But both of them had that quality of never seeing themselves as separate and apart from their people. They were the product of their people. Gold in terms of the Cherokee passion for education, and Wilma with her passion for activism and tribal government, and they both achieved some remarkable things in
Yeah.
their life.
So I think that's also, coming full circle of Gold, seeking that rootedness, that she was always proud of being Cherokee and knew where she came from, and she came home, and that's a beautiful aspect of on her 100th year. It was supposed to be her 100th birthday. The Council of Cherokee Nation passed this resolution of acknowledging her as a citizen of high distinction, and as they said, and that she be a recognized example of the intelligence and perseverance of the Cherokee people. That she epitomized, that spirit of the phoenix of, after all these affronts and targeting of Cherokee people, and not just Cherokee, but this resonates with us Native Americans across the board.
all across the
Yeah,
the country.
exactly. That she's this example of persevering, and not only persevering, but contributing, being an innovator, creating, thriving. Yes, and you talked about the time in 2008. She was coming upon her 100th birthday, but she passed away on April 29th, 2008. Can you tell us about that time when she passed, what you remember of it, and
well, I
those
drove
last
up here.
days, those last days of her life?
I didn't know that she was failing. So, like everyone, her sister Billy made it to 100, and we had all, Billy's daughters had arranged for all of us to send birthday cards on a certain date, starting 100 days before her birthday.
Oh.
A different card would arrive. We'd send them to Billy Jr., and she'd make sure that they got in the mail, so that every day she went to the mail, there was a birthday card there.
Oh, wow.
And so we were anticipating the celebrations for Gold in hopes that she would make it to 100, and she sure wanted to. But as soon as I was living in Texas then, and as soon as I learned of the celebration of life for her, it was held in the tribal council. It was packed. You could not have fit another person into that room with the shoehorn. And I remember Dr. Hill, the Oneida gentleman, chief of the Oneida tribe, who was a companion and colleague of hers. I remember him speaking. I remember Wilma asking everyone who was related to her to stand up. And all through the room, in every shade and hue of Cherokee people,
Wow.
there were all of her relatives. All the way down to little bitty children, that maybe they won't remember that day, but they'll sure hear about it as they grow up. And that's just who Gold was. She was a member of her family. She was a member of her tribal nation. She was a member of the American Indian science and engineering community, and she was a true example of what Chief Mankiller used to call living with a good mind. That was Gold.
And I love that there's the orbit, that eternal orbit of, here we have, it comes on the most basic level of family and community to the world, to the universe, and comes around, and she would be buried in the Ross Cemetery. Is that right?
Well, her ashes are interred, and we'll take a picture of that in a little bit. Yeah.
So she returned home.
Right. So the public ceremony was at the Cherokee Nation Tribal Council. Then there was a smaller service at graveside that was just for family.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, she's back, right back where she began.
Wow. And lastly, to wrap up this conversation, thank you so much, Wadon. Thank you so much for this conversation and sharing these very, intimate and personal, but it gives us this perspective because we hear, as you said, a lot of different aspects about her identity of she's this trailblazer in science and math and engineering.
And
but what does she
You
mean?
might think that would be kind of cold or off-putting. My math teacher in high school was not one of my favorite teachers, but I had no aptitude for math.
Yeah, me either.
But she was somebody very special. She used to send me Christmas cards because she thought that she loved the fact that I told stories. She would write me a little note at Christmas every year asking how the year had gone, where all did I go telling stories. She was very interested in that. And I was doing a performance out in San Francisco, and that was the closest, and we were hoping that she'd be able to come. My cousin Jenny, who lived near her and took care of her a lot, was planning on driving Gold into San Francisco to the Performing Arts Center where I was, but she wasn't feeling very well that day. So instead, the next day, Jenny came and got me and took me down to Los Altos so that Gold and I could spend the day together there.
Wow.
They're just wonderful memories. I did not get to spend near enough time with her looking back. But, I had some pretty good memories.
Yes.
Stand up straight, Gail. I used to be as tall as you.
That's adorable. Well, lastly, I wanted to be sure to ask you, what do you hope that especially Cherokees or anyone in general remember about Gold? And what do you feel like her legacy really means to Cherokee people and to your family, for instance, and what you, again, hope that they remember?
I hope that people will remember the most important things about Gold is, never stop learning, never stop your education. If you have a dream, work for it. It was, like she said, you do the best you can. That's what she took from her family, her history, to travel with her on that journey of education and teaching. She was, it's to me the interesting balance about Gold's life was that all the time that she was an educator, she was furthering her own education.
Absolutely.
She never got to a point where she stopped and said, "Yeah, I know enough."
Yeah.
So I hope that people remember her passion for following your dream and doing the hard work that it takes to do that.
Thank you, Wadon. Thank you so much for meeting with us. And again, thank you to the Museum of Native American History. Please look out for more of the events and series with Gail, storytelling, the historical Native American woman trailblazers. And Wado, have a great day. I'm going to practice my Cherokee. I need to learn more because I work with Cherokee students here. Dona dago ha'i. Ahehe hagone, as we say in Dene, and all take care, stay well.